Hello, this is Zach, and this is part two of the CRUD operations in interactive application. And in this video, I wanted to show how to use SQL to perform our CRUD operations rather than just our RPG. In our options here, I'm going to go through and use SQL rather than our write and our deletes and our updates and things like that. We're going to be replacing these with SQL. So that's our goal in this video. So I'm going to first thing that I want to do is create a data structure that we'll be using with our SQL statement. And so we'll want a variable for each of the fields that we're accepting from the screen. So I'm going to create a data structure and I'll name it file data. Uh, And so I'm just going to create a field for each one that we have in our display file. And I'm just going to I'm going to give it the name PGM Pugum before the name just to show that this is local to our program here. And so I'm just going to say first name, and this is a char 15. And we always want to initialize, and I can change this to say last name. And then we'll make one for the middle initial. And we'll make one for the social. This was a zoned of 9. And we just won't specify um, any decimal points. Then we have Pugum and birthday. And this is a date, and we want to specify that it is ISO. That's the type of date, or the format at least, the format of our date. And then the last thing we want is our job description. And this was a character of 20. And so, yeah, it's always good to split your screen so that we can see all the types of our fields that we want so we don't have a mismatch when it comes to receiving a value into our variables. So now that we have that, the next thing we want to do is we want to do something called, we want to do a set option. And so we want to say, um, what we want to do is say at the beginning of our program, oh, and actually, before we even do that, we want to create, we want to change this to be an SQL RPG program, but I'll do this first. We will say exec SQL, and we'll say set option commit is equal to none. Bang. And I'll turn this into an SQL RPG. Just letting me rename. Error. Oh, save. Oops. Save this real quick, and then we'll rename it. And all I'll do is just say SQL. And so now this is an SQL RPG program. And we lost our split screen. Okay, so now we just turned our RPG program into an SQL RPG program. So now we can, our compiler will expect us to be able to use these exec SQL statements. And so if you want to look into what the set option means, there's some IBM documentation that goes over it. And you could go into where the commit is. I think it's down here. Yeah, here, and it kind of talks about what the commit means. There's also some other useful resources that talk about commit and what the none means. And this is also another resource. I kind of found a couple good ones. It's always good to understand what we're putting into our program. Okay, and so next, now that we have this set option commit to none, we can go through and start putting our SQL into here. But actually, now that we have this data structure, what I want to do is go to our subroutines down here and change them. Because now instead of these fields that we have here, these variables, we're going to use our new data structure fields. So I'm going to say, what I can actually do is if you press Control Alt and the down arrow, you can move your cursor onto multiple lines and just say, you can just type on all of them. So that's kind of a quick way of changing a lot of lines at once. These aren't really all lined up, so I can't really do it that well, but so I'm just changing these to now be using our data structures fields. Oops. There. So now when we go from screen to file, we're taking fields from our file, putting them into our data structure, and then from file, we're going to the screen and we're putting them into here. So now that we have that, let's go and start adding our SQL. And so let's start just with our first option, which is the create. So this is going to be where we add a record to our file. And so we'll do that by using an insert into statement. And so, I could look up an example of that really quick. So this is the IBMI documentation on their insert statement. And so here's what we're kind of going to be trying to accomplish here. We just want to insert into our file. We list out the fields and the values that we want to insert into it. So that is what we're going to do here. And so the first thing I will do is comment out what we don't need. So we're not going to need to chain anymore, and we also won't need to write to the file. So what I'll do is just delete this because we're not going to need it anymore. So instead of chaining, and it doesn't matter if it's found, we're just going to get rid of this. So now that we just have this, we below, oh wait, what did I get rid of? Okay, yeah, I need to get rid of this as well. Get rid of our write, and so now we send from screen to file. Which we have changed to go from screen to our data structure, so we could change the name of that, but we'll just leave it for now. And so what we're going to do is create record with SQL. And so what we first need to write is exec SQL, and then underneath that, it gave me, started doing things for me. So I want to start this with an insert, and then into, and then our file is CRUD PF. And then underneath that, we want to put our values. And those go in the parentheses, and this is just like that example that I showed. And we put, we write this, and then we start putting in our variables from our data structure. So I'm just going to write all those out. We're going to insert all these values into there. I'm going to start a new line. And I'm just going to put these in order so it makes sense. And Pogum birthday and Pogum, forgot my, okay. and job description. So that's all we need. So we're inserting into our file the values that we're holding in our data structure. And so once we do that, we can use some type of error handling if we wanted to with SQL states and things like that. But for now, I'm just going to leave the plain SQL statement to keep this simple, and I'll let you figure out if things need to be monitored and how to accomplish that. So what we can do now is test if we can create a file or create a record, I mean. So we're going to compile this for the first time as SQL ILE RPG program. It just gives you those options once you change once you change that. And so our program is called CRUD program. So I'm just going to call CRUD program, and we're back here. So if I press the 1 and enter, brings us here, and so I can say test SQL last SQL, and then we'll use something like that. Description SQL, and if we press the add, it should just add it. So now if I read with 2, go in here, this is still using RPG, but now we have our record that got created using SQL instead of RPG. Cool. So now let's go into the next option. So for the next one, we are going to be doing the read. So what can we get rid of? We can get rid of our chain. What all can I get rid of? I want to get rid of this here and our end. No. So, okay, this is going to be after, this is going to be after our SQL statement gets written, and I'm going to keep this record not found message in here, but I'm going to write it if our SQL state is not equal, or I want to write this if it is, all right, I'm going to change this a little bit. I'm going to say if it's not equal to this value, 02000, and what we want to do if it's not equal is we want to take this and display it, and we also want this, so I'm going to cut this, throw it into here, get rid of the space, and then we're going to say else. So I'll explain what this means. So the SQL state, when you execute an SQL statement in your RPG, there's a bunch of SQL states that could result from it, which could be errors or just non-error messages as well. So what I want to do once I'm in here is I could just look up the code that I'm putting in here. And so the result of the select into statement or subselect was an empty table. So when you get this SQL state, it means that your table is empty that you're trying to select from. So what we're saying is if we're trying to read a record and it's not empty, then we'll display it to the screen and then we'll execute our format. But if it's true that our table is empty, we're going to say that the record wasn't found because the table is empty, and then we leave. So that's the logic behind that. And so now we can do our select statement. So this is just going to be a basic select statement. And let me look up a quick example of that. This is the IBM documentation for select, and usually at the bottom there's some examples. So this is what we're going to be accomplishing. We're just going to select. We can say all, but it's always best to write the variables that you want to select, and then from our table. And then you can sort and do other things like that, but in our case we're just going to be selecting and not sorting the data. So what we will do now is write our SQL statement. So we want to put that above everything. And we will say select from table. And so we start with exec SQL, go to our next line and say, oops, trying to put it in the right spot. Select, we'll just, for our case, we'll just say select all to make it simple to write. Select all, and then we're going to say we're going to select into our data structure that we created. So we can just say file, date. Since we're selecting all of our fields from our table and our data structure matches all of the fields that we have, we can just select straight into it and it'll match up perfect. But if we had, say if we had like an extra field at the bottom of our file and we didn't accommodate that in our data structure, we'd run into an issue. Or say if we didn't have the last name field in our data structure, but it exists in the file, we would run into an issue. We have to have matching positions on both sides when we're selecting into something. And then we're going to say from our file, CRUD PF, and then we're going to say where our SSN that we have entered. So in here, our SSN is just called SSN. So it's just SSN equals what was on the screen, which is now in our data structure, correct? No, we'll want to use what was, we should be able to use what's in our data structure. No, we want to use this field here. Yeah, we use SSN search because that's what our user is typing into the first field. So that's what we want there. And then once we have that we just end it with a semicolon and we are all set. So we select into our data structure. If a record is found, then we will put it onto the screen and execute the format. If our table is empty, if this is, if our SQL state is equal to 02000, then we'll say record's not found. Phenomenal. So let's test it. Save that. And we'll recompile this. And let's bring this back up by pressing F9. Call this again. And so now, if I just read, it should work exactly the same way, but we want to test it since we're changing it. And we get all the same information. Great. And you know what other values are in here? What I can do is start up an SQL job with the DB2 extension for I. Once I have that, I can hit the plus and I can select all from, I have to qualify this and say CRUD. So if I select all, press Control R, shows us everything that's in here. So these are all the fields that we have. So I can do, I still have my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So if I do read, just to keep testing, and it brings up the field that already existed. Cool. Okay, so moving on. Now we will add our next SQL statement, which will be the update. So let me grab an example. And I'm just on IBMI's documentation. I'm scrolling through these statements and I see the update and then it brings up all about the update. And we're just interested in these examples for now. So this is what we're going to try to accomplish. We're going to update our table and then we're going to set the values. And then we can say things like where, like we'll say where SSN is equal to something. All right, so like before, we can get rid of our chain. But what is the first thing that we are having happen here? We're displaying our values to the screen. So we're basically doing a select all. So what we should do is create a subroutine where we are selecting all from our table and then putting it onto the screen, because that's we're gonna have to rewrite this and put it somewhere else. Since we're doing that, might as well just create a subroutine for it. So we're just going to create one that says select all from table, and we'll just say this is begin subroutine select. We'll call it something like retrieve data. So we'll say retrieve data and then end subroutine. It could be more specific, but so what I'll do is we're just going to steal this. Wham. Bam. And you know what we could potentially do is put our error message in the subroutine as well. Probably could put all this in there. For now, I'll just leave it in here and we'll just only put the SQL statement just in case we want different messages for whatever reason, but we probably could end up putting this in the subroutine. But anyways, so now we have this in our subroutine. So what I want to do is call this where we had our SQL statement, and it's going to do the same thing. Uh, what do we want to say? Execute subroutine, and then our for that. Okay, cool. So that's going to do what we want. And now, since we're doing that, instead of doing our chain and all this, we can use our subroutine. You know, we actually are going to do the same thing in both places. So I'm going to actually take this and put it in our subroutine too. Might as well. So I'm copying. I'm just going to paste it because it's going to be the same. We want the same thing to happen in both places. I don't know why that looks so weird. Oops. Great. Okay. Sweet. So now we have that. We can comment out up here. Where was that? Here. We'll just comment it out for now. We could delete it. Actually, let's delete it. We don't need it. Goodbye. I have a bad habit of just commenting things out and leaving it in my program forever. We don't want it. Okay. Retrieve. Okay. Okay. So now that we have that, we are updating. Update mode. We do not need this chain. Goodbye chain. And this ends here. And we actually don't need the record found anymore. So we can get rid of this. And we'll also get rid of this. And we can move this up here. So we want to call our subroutine just like we did up here. Check if records exist and retrieve data, whatever. And so after we do that, if it doesn't work, then it'll say no record found, cancel is equal to on. And then if cancel is on, then it won't let us update anything. It'll just go back to the main screen. Great. So now let's get into our update. So if we do retrieve our data, it's going to go to the screen and we will change where we have our update. There it is. So what we can get rid of is our update, and we won't need this subroutine getting called anymore. So if the user presses, what is it, F6, then we will perform our update. And I already think I showed an example of that. So let's just say update, but we need our exec SQL, and then we can, oops, he's filled in some stuff for me. So we'll say update our table, CRUD and we'll set first name is equal to our fields that we have in our display file. So we'll say username, first name, and then I can copy this and put for last for first. Last. And we'll say L. Middle initial equals user MI. And then we got birth date is equal to, oh, I'm adding semicolons after these. That's not what I want. These should be commas. Just did that out of habit, I guess. Okay, keep on going here. User, birth, comma, and then job description. And we're not updating our SSN. I explained that in the first video. We, since that's our keyed value, we don't want to change that ever. We could create a separate program for updating that if we wanted to, but we don't want to be able to update that value and run the risk of trying to create a duplicate value. And I just wrote the completely wrong field here. User job. And what we want to do is say where our SSN is equal to the SSN search that we have. So there's that. Oh, and we want that there. So, and now we'll also do a little bit of error handling and say this will be our error message. And we'll say that if the SQL state is not equal to 0, 5 zeros, and if then for message line L1, we'll say that, the record was not found, or was not updated, was not updated. And I'll show that cancel equals on. I want to turn cancel on. So let's go back to the listing here. And so let's see so if we have a state of zeros, that means that this was successful. And there's no warning or exception or anything. So if our SQL state is just all zeros, that means everything went well. So what I'm saying is here, if it wasn't successful, then we'll just say the record wasn't updated. Because if it was updated, it would just be a bunch of zeros, which is good. So we'll just tell the user if, or if not, well, we'll just tell them if it wasn't updated. What we could do is say, you know what, we'll say else, else, then we'll say that our record was updated actually, if not. If it's anything else, what I should actually do is say that if it's equal to zeros, then we'll say record was updated, and if it's anything else, we'll just say it wasn't. Record was updated, else record was not updated. Okay, cool. You could get into more specifics with the SQL states, but just to keep it simple, I'll say that for now. And we'll cut this. And since this is pretty simple, this will work for what we want it to do. And let's see what else we wanted. Oops. I think oh, and I guess we'll just test this and then we'll go into the delete. So we'll say CRUD PGM. So let's actually update our record that we created. I think it was just all fives. Let me see. Let's see. We have all fives. Let me run this and see. Could have something wrong here. Let's see. Let's see what we're missing. Looks like I need to compile this. So let's compile it and make sure we're all up to snuff here. Oh, and it didn't compile. Oh, we missed our equals. I don't think that's necessarily why we had the issue before, but let's see. All right, here we go. That was successful. So let's call our program. Let's update. All right, there we go. So now let's say new. Just add some things to here. Change this J, and we shouldn't be able to change this, but I guess we're not even updating it anyways, so it's not gonna make a difference. 24, 3, and then we'll just say new job description. So if we press F6, should leave. But so let's just F12 out of here and see if we can read this value. All right, we got some issues. All right, let's take a look. I think this execute format is in the wrong spot. We don't want it there because we're retrieving and executing format there. So what we want to do is if we press update, and it was successful, the record was updated, and we show, no, that's not true. We want to leave. So if this worked, we'll say this, clear, clear, clear. Username, last name. I guess I took away that execute format, so let's see if that does what we need it to do. Let's test it out. CRUD. So let's say we update. We'll just change these. And we'll press F6. Okay, record was updated. So it was the execute format was in the wrong spot there. So if we go ahead and read, so this is going to test our subroutine as well and make sure that it says new and new. And another good way of testing is to go into our db2 for I extension, go in and run this again, and we see that we have our new, actually it was down here, SQL, new and new. I guess that's how I tested it before as well. So we see that that got changed to say new in both of those. And we could go ahead and do that in more fields as well. So let's just update them all just to show that they all work. New 2. Make this a J, make this a 1, and say new job. description, F6 to update, brings us back and says the record was updated. If we read, then we got new and all of our stuff changed. And if we run our SQL statement in here, we see those changes exist in the table here. So let's test if we try to update something and it doesn't work. Well, I guess if we just like type in something that doesn't exist, it'll just say record not found. So that's fine. And lastly, we are going to do our delete. Let me pull up an example of the delete. It's probably up at the top. Delete. So this is the IBMI documentation for delete. Let's look at an example. It just says delete from table where, and we specify a field and a value to delete, or that record to delete. Usually we want it to be a keyed value so it's unique, or we could just say delete all where the employee number is 6 and or 60 and it deletes all those employees. Okay, so let's go to where we have our delete, and we will delete. So what we want to get rid of is this. We don't need it anymore. And what we do need to change is this chain, because what we'll do is say, okay, so this is if, okay. So we'll have to change this a little bit, but we can do it. So we'll say if found, so we're going to get rid of this chain just because I'm trying to do only SQL. Else, we shouldn't need this because that's in our subroutine, so we can get rid of this redundant code. Do while, and we get rid of our end if. Okay, so do we need this file to screen? No, we don't. No, we don't. So we get rid of our file to screen, and we don't need this. That's what gave us issues before. And now we just do our check if records exist and retrieve. Where are we here? Check if records exist. So we'll put that there. I'm not doing a very good job of commenting and making things clean, but I would do that after I get everything working, just to make it so it's easier to read later on. And I would encourage you to do the same. Okay, retrieve data. Once we do that, we get our select and everything's going to be on the screen. And all we have to do is let the user press F7, and then they will perform the delete. So what we'll do is say exec SQL, and we'll write our delete statement. So let's just delete from, and then our table, which is CRUD PF. And what we say is where our SSN is equal to the value they entered, which is the SSN search field, and that's all. That is all that we need for that SQL statement. But what we will do, something similar to our update, is where we say if it's not, if the SQL state is not 0, then we didn't delete our record. So we'll say record, if it is equal to that, then we say record was deleted. And then else record was not deleted. Oh, wait, not deleted. Okay, that should be what we want. That one's a little bit simpler, but that should be everything that we need to do. Let me just test them all really quickly. Compiled, and let's go ahead and test it all. So let's actually just go in here and delete our record. So here we have it. Press F7. Record was deleted. Let's try to read it. record wasn't found. If we try to update it, oops, record wasn't found. And so, oops, pressing the wrong things. So, and if we go back into our VS Code, we can see that that record doesn't exist anymore. So deleted. Let's just go through them all really quickly and show doing this again. Oopsies. So I'm just going to do 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 2. That's going to be our record that we create. So and we're not moving this to the screen anymore. Oh well, the goal is to use SQL, so I'll just leave that for you. So 2020 02 03, and we'll say I have a great job, and we'll say add. So when we press that, yeah, we're missing our handling of the SSN field, but so now if we want to read that, here it is. And if we go in just to double check in VS Code, we should see that this is the value I just created. You see it down here at the bottom. I have a great job. Okay. And then if we press F12 and we go to update, what was that? 1, 2, 3, something like that. Yep. Okay. I have a bad job. Turned into a bad job. Let's put my full name just to change everything. A, and then 3. Change everything to 3. And then we'll update. Record was updated. Let's read it again. Now we see the changes. Oops, and I left the program, but we see that that's there. And let's go ahead and delete it. And if we press F7, go ahead and record was deleted. Record was not found because it is deleted. Sweet. So that's basically everything that I wanted to go through. So that was showing how to implement SQL for our CRUD operations instead of our RPG program, or instead of just our RPG syntax. So great. That's all I wanted to say. So bye. At some point, I may create another part to this where I show using the CRUD operations in service programs. So maybe that will be coming at some point, but I think I'm going to make some videos going through built-in functions and explaining those. Those will be shorter compared to these longer videos. So that's my plan. Okay.